welcome to Relationship Helpers. These are your hosts, Laura and
Vincent Ketchy.
Thank you for joining us today. Our guest is Kimberly Dewberry. Vincent interviewed her, and in the midst of this interview, he learned quite a bit about being an adult child of an alcoholic.
Right. So as you'll listen to her story, Kimberly grew up in a home where her father was an alcoholic and actually a substance abuser as well, with prescription meds. And she gives a lot of insight from her story about that whole process and how damaging that can be for a child growing up in that situation.
I can only imagine what that meant for her as an adult trying to function in relationships too.
Right. So she didn't function well in relationships.
Okay.
And as you hear, she went through relationships, divorced a couple of times, things like that. So she was not steady in relationships.
And as therapists, we see these patterns that develop in adults where they've grown up in households that were dysfunctional, that there may have been a substance abuser or alcohol abuser, and then they grow up and they have relationships of their own and they go awry.
Right. And these relationships, I guess one of the key things in these relationships is poor communication. Just really poor communication. I think that can be said in poor communication and, this secrecy, this kind of keeping things, not really addressing the issues, I guess.
Right. So in one's childhood, it may have been important at one time to keep secrets,
right,
for the purposes of safety or whatnot.
Right.
But then that secrecy, that tendency to have secrecy may follow you throughout your life, and you may keep secrets that aren't healthy to keep.
Right. Yeah. So, and this is kind of the way that these compulsions, addictions kind of work. If you listen to some of our episodes on abuse, it's similar, keeping these secrets of what happened or what people were doing, these abusive type behaviors, or even with the sexual addiction you may hear in one of our other episodes as well, this pattern of keeping... I guess this pattern of the person trying to handle it on their own.
Okay.
Keeping that secret, maybe not telling anybody else, or if it's in a family, just the family knowing it, but them not talking about it either.
So for Kimberly, she has written a book about her experience where it seems like the doors were kind of blown wide open for her because she had her father had distanced himself from the family, and then he kind of radically and automatically came right back into her life unexpectedly. Right.
Well, not on his own will, I guess, in a way, but from a medical
unintentionally
standpoint. Right, unintentionally. But God really worked through that chaotic, that kind of horrible circumstance.
And so it led to exposing some parts in Kimberly and her relationships that she needed to work on.
Well, it's where they couldn't keep the secret anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, couldn't. It was just so much in their face. It had to be talked about. That issue had to be discussed. It was so, like I say, in your face, and she'll talk about that. I think one of the keys you'll hear from there is going out and, if you're in a situation like that, getting help. And getting help not in just one way, but in many ways, through counseling, through groups, through reading, through just many different avenues.
So it's our hope that as you listen to Kimberly's interview, that you're able to take what she has to say about her own experiences and maybe apply it to your own life. You may not have had an alcoholic father, but you may see some things in yourself, maybe about some kind of dysfunctional past you've had, and you may be able to apply what she learned about herself and her recovery.
Right, and hopefully this interview will be encouraging to you to go out and to seek that help. And you can go to her website. She's got many resources there of places you can go to find help. And I think it's going to be very enlightening for those who may be on the fence, if they're in on a fence or on the fence of denial. I don't know wherever you want to say of, is their relationship that bad? Is it that dysfunctional that I need to work on it?
Well, we thank you for listening today, and here is Vincent's interview with Kimberly Dewberry.
Hello and welcome to Relationship Helpers. I'm excited to have with me today Kimberly Dewberry. She is the author of 3 Weeks to Forgiveness, God's Redemption in the Dark Places of Addiction. It's where she discusses growing up in an alcoholic household, the pain and hurt from it, and her recovery or her healing process. Thank you for being with us here today, Kimberly.
Thank you for having me, Vincent. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So tell us a little bit more about your background.
Well, how long do you have? I'm just kidding. So I grew up, like you said, in a household. My father was an alcoholic and a prescription drug abuser. And he actually did not start drinking or have an issue with prescription pain medicine until I was around 15 years old. So it happened, a little bit later, but for a teenage girl, that there's a lot of mixed feelings and emotions and, going on anyway.
Right.
And
so
then,
you're a teenager. Yeah. And do you have any brothers or sisters at that time or that?
Yes, I have a younger sister. She's 10 years younger than me. So, she would have been 5 at the time. So her view looked a lot different than my view, drastically different. So, being the oldest child, I took on a lot of self-imposed responsibility, for my dad's addiction, even though no one ever blamed me. No one ever said, this is your fault. I still, I took that on, in my own mind.
Right. So it was very subtle. You were subtly blaming yourself and taking on all these other burdens, I guess.
Yes. And as you may well know, that's very common for a lot of adult children of alcoholics whenever the addiction starts to take over. It really, a lot of that self-blame, issues with self-worth, looking for love, and acceptance and all of that. It all goes along with it.
Well, I think it really goes along not just with addiction, but with kids in general. As kids are selfish. Kids are thinking about themselves. And so when something's going wrong, they're looking not outside of themselves, but at themselves. And what did they do to make it wrong? Whether it's alcoholic addiction, prescription drug addiction, or any type of abuse, just raging, or maybe even their parent working too much, or...
just about everything.
Yeah, any of that, yes.
Yeah.
And they may blame themselves. They look at themselves and take it really internally. So for yourself, you're 15, and your father begins going down this path, and you begin to blame yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And then I carried that over into my adulthood. Of course, I was, I spent, 3 years of still at home until I graduated. And then, I got married. I escaped, the household, but I escaped into a more dysfunction. I've been married 3 times, and every time I've had, issues with the relationships in some way. So
what did you do as a teenager there? What were the ways that you were blaming yourself during those 3 years that you were there?
Well, I rebelled a lot. And I did that, I guess, because whenever Dad would drink, he would isolate himself, and he would get angry, but in his anger, he would be silent. So he would shut people out, and he would shut me out.
So he's very emotionally distant.
Yes, very much so. And as you said, being selfish, I immediately thought that because he was silent, he no longer loved me. And so anytime as I grew into an adult, and all during that time, if someone, wasn't paying attention to me, I immediately thought, well, they don't love me. And I wasn't raised in a church going home. We believed in God, but So I didn't really understand that God relationship, what that looked like. And so I correlated my earthly father, relationship with him with how my relationship with God was. So if I'm not hearing from God, he's silent, he doesn't love me.
He doesn't want you. He doesn't love you. Yeah, because you get all those negative feeling and all that negative self-talk that comes to you in those times when someone is silent, if God's silent or whoever it is that's silent.
Right, exactly. And so, I would repeat these patterns in my teenage years, of just self-destruction, just making poor choices. Teenagers make poor choices in a lot of cases anyway, but I was doing a lot of things that the average teenager, wouldn't do.
So you're doing a lot of risky behaviors that others maybe wouldn't. Okay.
Yes, exactly. I talk a little bit about that in 3 Weeks to Forgiveness, one episode in particular where, I was 17 years old. I was dating, a boy, and he was seeing another girl behind my back. I caught them, and I just went into this rage because I felt, I got that rejection. And so that's just one example of this outrageous behavior. And of course I, had consequences as a result of that. But, at the time I felt like I was the victim, and so it's different things like that I carried with me. And I repeated all of, so many different, self-destructive, patterns, as a result of, how my teenage years were formed, in that dysfunction, in that addiction. So
you would respond to these hurtful things with rage.
Rage. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I ran away from home once. I talk about that in the book too. And it was this weird mix of emotions whenever I had ran away, because I felt a sense of responsibility to my mother, and my sister, because I left them, but I didn't want to be there either. So it was this pull, tug of war, really, within me. And that happened whenever I got married the first time. It was still that push-pull, kind of feeling. I felt guilty for leaving. But yet I didn't want to be there either. Right.
So you had a lot of these mixed emotions and nothing that was like steady in your spirit. It was very unstable.
Unstable. Yeah. My whole life, really my whole, starting in my teenage years and until, it was just a few years ago, I lived in this chaos and this turmoil. And even though, I did find Christ in my late 20s. I didn't understand what that meant, really. And I didn't know what that Christian life looked like. And I didn't really have anyone that could help guide me through that. So I fell away very quickly and went right back into these patterns.
Right. So you weren't really discipled. You didn't have people there to come beside you and show you what this life living with Christ is like, this healthy living. And for you, your comfort was chaos.
Right. Right.
That's what you're used to. That's like, it felt different or uncomfortable when there wasn't chaos.
Right.
When there was calmness.
Yeah. Whenever there was calm, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to act.
Well, you thought God didn't love you.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so it was unsettling when things were calm for you. Mm-hmm. And you didn't know why. You didn't realize that's what you were doing. You were feeling unsettled when things were calm and maybe even healthy at times. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, there was very, very few moments of calm until the last 2.5 years now, almost 3, when God shook my life up. And I truly believe that, even whenever we are far away from God, he continuously pursues us, and he continuously wants to pull us back. And he will sometimes go to extreme measures, not extreme for him, but in our eyes, extreme measures in order to get us to a place where we finally realize we can't do it without him. And that's exactly what he did.
So he's always wanting us and never rejecting us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what, he helped me to realize. God did. He helped me to realize that, and it only took this one major event in my life for me to realize that, to realize, what, I can't do this by myself. And this is not the way life is supposed to be.
So it sounds like maybe that was your time. That was your aha moment, or that light bulb moment. So tell us about that.
Yeah. And, my dad, as a result of his addiction, him and my mom separated. They never divorced, but they did not live together. Mom actually moved in with me, and she's been with me ever since that time. But Dad, he eventually became homeless. He lived under bridges and overpasses, and couch surfed on different people's couches momentarily. So
he really deteriorated.
He did. He deteriorated quite a bit, and that happened the last 5 years of his life. And then for the last, actually off and on for the last 5 years of his life, we didn't know where he was. We didn't know if he was alive. We didn't know if he had passed on. Because we hadn't heard from him or anything. And then one day in my seemingly normal, chaotic life, he got a hold of his sister and my aunt, and she called us, and he was in a hospital, and he had fallen and broken his hip. And while he was in there, they discovered that he had stomach cancer. And so my family made the decision to go and see him. And this you have to keep in mind, too, this happened like in about 3 days time. So it was like this tornado of, here he is. What do we do? We need to go, And so we went, and the doctors let us know that his cancer was inoperable. There wasn't anything they were going to be able to do, and they were going to release him on hospice. Well, people that don't have a home, they can't really receive that hospice care. So we made the decision for Dad to come and live with us until he died.
Right, so that was a very difficult time. He abandoned you for about 5 years or so. You don't know where he's at, and then all of a sudden you get a call from a hospital, and 3 days you're there with him, and then you're taking him back home. Right,
exactly. And so that was the tornado or hurricane, that God, threw into our lives. And but I truly believe that God did that for many reasons. I mean, number one, so that Dad would not die alone, and he would not. He would be surrounded by his family and by love, but also to kind of wake me up and help me to realize that there is power in the forgiveness that God gives us as a gift, and that in turn we give that gift back to others, and forgive others for hurt, betrayal, all of that. And he also used that to help me to realize that my current husband is also an alcoholic.
You've been blinded to that.
I had been completely, because of my codependency. I'd already been married twice before. I didn't want another divorce, And so I was determined to just put that aside and not look at it, not address it, and for fear of being that divorced woman again, and other fears too. So he used that one moment or that one event to just totally turn our world upside down. And out of that, I was able to heal a broken relationship with my earthly father, but also have a good relationship with God as my father, and not compare my earthly father to God.
So you had a lot of closure with your earthly father. You were able to forgive him, to actually process some things that went on. And
Yes.
It sounds like maybe you were assertive with him and confronted him on things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did. We had a lot of hard moments while he was here, but we also had a lot of beautiful moments. And sometimes in those difficult, conversations is where the beauty came out. And so, but, in the end, it was really a beautiful gift that God gave to us. And we were not only, or I was not only able to heal my relationship, with my dad, but with God and also my husband. And my husband rededicated his life to Christ and started recovery. And so, all of these things just happened.
So it sounds like this gave you an opportunity to confront your dad, to actually talk about things that you haven't been able to because he was gone, and you had to confront it yourself. I mean, because he's just put there right in your face. You had to confront his alcoholism, all the hurt, all the pain. And by doing that, it exposed your husband's alcoholism. And I don't know, maybe your husband saw all what was going on as well, and it just made it where you kind of had to confront that as well. I mean, it was just right there.
It was all right there. I mean, it was just like this big suitcase full of stuff that we had carried around for years and years and years was just dumped at our feet. And we had to sort through it all, and that, that visual image of this junk just, in front of you, having to sort through it. And what do we do? And how do we handle this? And, our marriage and our family, just so many, and the fact that we knew Dad was going to die. I mean, we knew we had a very short time. We didn't know exactly how long. And so we took advantage of every moment possible.
Well, so that pushed you so you didn't continue to procrastinate.
Exactly.
I mean, that terminal illness right there actually pushed you to be assertive and pushed you to confront things.
Yes. Yeah, it did that. And it also, God showed me how to be merciful. And he showed me how to be gracious, to people that have hurt me. Which I hadn't always been able to do that. I had a lot of anger. I was very judgmental. I had all those things, but, the Lord started showing me the fruits of the Spirit before I even realized what the fruits of the Spirit were.
So the Holy Spirit was really working through you during that time, or you were allowing it as before you weren't.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, I mean, I had, like I said, I had come to know Christ in my late 20s, but I had completely turned away from all of that. And I was not walking with the Lord up until this point. And, it was through through that event with my dad coming back. And also, even after that, through the grief. I mean, I was in a completely broken, state. Of grief and depression and isolation, and God met me there. I mean, he really met me there, and that was whenever I started to see the events that had transpired in a different way.
Mm-hmm. You started seeing the actual truth.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And God
tell us about, some of our audience may be out there and wondering, hey, is my spouse struggling with an addiction, with alcoholism or prescription drugs? What would you say to them to help them understand or tell if someone is?
Well, isolation, for one, a lot of alcoholics and addicts, they will isolate completely. Rages of anger, some have rages of anger where they normally wouldn't. Altered personalities, their normal personality is not the same anymore. Different things like that. But, Vincent, I think the most important thing I can say for people who may suspect that their loved one could have an addiction, or maybe even know that they have an addiction, is to themselves seek help in a recovery program of some sort, with a good Christian counselor. Talk to their pastor somewhere, someone, get some good solid help, because a lot of times we want to also isolate because we're embarrassed, we're ashamed, we're blaming ourselves, for it. So we want to hide from it. And God wants us to bring, the Satan's tools out into the light so he can't use them against us anymore. And getting into a good recovery program is just one way of being able to do that, because you're involved in this community of other people that get it.
Right.
They understand. And then along with that, you can start getting tools to help you, find the serenity in your chaos.
Yeah. So you're saying the first step is actually to go out there and have the courage to get support.
Yes.
And there's many different ways you can get support.
Yes.
And I know with my counseling, I recommend all of the above. If it's dealing with an addiction, you need to be seeing a counselor, you need to talk to your pastor, and you need to be going to group. If you're really wanting to work on things, if you're really wanting things to progress.
Absolutely. There's several different recovery programs out there too. There's Christian-based programs, and then there's the Al-Anon type and all of that. So
So I recommend Celebrate Recovery to a lot of my clients because it's throughout the nation, but just a group period, and specifically groups that pertain to what they're dealing with, whether it is with the alcoholism or whether it's with a husband or spouse who's raging or physically abusive or whatever the abuse may be. To do that. So for you, how did you come to the realization, or how did you build up the courage to seek that support?
Well, like I said, I was isolated in my own grief, isolated from my family, from everybody. And, I really believed that, the Holy Spirit was working on me, and I decided to go seek help from a counselor. I found a Christian therapist, and I went and saw her, and she was the one who suggested to me that I try Al-Anon. And at first I resisted because I said, well, I don't want to, I had this in my head that I was to go to this group and I would just, bash, my alcoholic husband, but that's not what it's about at all. And whenever I finally, got the courage and, I believe our strength comes from the Lord. And I really think that, through prayer and, wrestling with that I finally decided, okay, enough's enough. I've got to do something. And so I decided to walk through the doors of Al-Anon for the first time, and I was scared to death and didn't know what to expect. And, but I'm so glad that I did, because that was the first part of my journey, for recovery, because I was beginning to see that I'm not alone. I'm not by myself. There's so many other people that have the same feelings that I have. And just hearing those stories, helped encourage me as well. So,
so you don't even on your first time going there, many times you don't have to really talk very much. It's just powerful just to listen to the others, isn't it?
Yes, I didn't even talk.
Okay, yeah.
The first night I said, my name's Kimberly. That was it. But yeah, you're right. Hearing those stories, I could relate to them, even though their stories were different. They were still the same in a lot of ways. So, but I started with Al-Anon, and then I went on to Celebrate Recovery after that. And then now my church has a recovery program that's Christian based. And my husband and I are co-leaders in that group with a lot of other great people.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So, yeah, like I mentioned to a lot of my clients, just going to the group, you don't even have to say anything, but God will speak to you through those group members.
Exactly.
Just allow them to do that.
Yeah. We see it all the time. I mean, you can go for, 3 or 4 weeks and not say anything.
But you'll get a lot out of it.
But you'll get a lot out of it, and it will help. It will help.
And it'll help just in a whole different way than just individual counseling. Right?
Yes. Yeah, it does. Because with an individual, counselor, it's a different perspective that you're seeing. When you go into group, you see a perspective of other people that directly correlates with what you're going through. And they get it. They understand. And, you're right. The Holy Spirit can speak through those people and give you such encouragement and such hope.
Yeah, and the Holy Spirit may use some of them, even not knowing that they're doing it at times, maybe confronting you about this truth that you've been not listening to, or just covering up, or just ignoring.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't go away if you ignore it. I mean, it really doesn't. I thought it did. I thought it would just, it'll work out on its own.
Yeah. So you thought in your mind, you kept telling yourself it would get better over time. Is that right?
Well, that, and I thought I could fix it.
You thought you could do it on your own.
I thought I could do it all by myself. Some of this codependency patterns that I had, I would buy my husband's beer for him because I thought, well, if I buy it, then at least he won't go and buy more.
Right. Right.
I could control how much he drinks, and it'll be okay. Or, I would have a few drinks with him because I was in my mind, I thought, well, if I had a few drinks, then maybe he'll stop when I stop. So you had all this faulty thinking. Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. Very faulty. That does not work. None of it works. And I can't control it. I can't control it. I didn't cause it, and that is between the person who is addicted to whatever substance it is or whatever thing. That's for that person and God to work out. And that's exactly what happened with my husband. And sometimes it takes huge events for that to happen,
Yeah, so God has to use sometimes big things to get our attention.
Exactly. And that's exactly what he did.
So tell me about what was maybe your most effective relationship skill.
My most effective relationship skill post recovery or pre-recovery?
Well, I don't know, maybe both.
Either way. My pre-recovery, I didn't have good relationship skills. I mean, it was readily apparent, especially when I started going through recovery, that I did think I could control, people, situations, and outcomes. And I had strained relationships as a result of that, because nobody wants other people telling them what to do.
Right.
Unless you're in a job and you have to. And even sometimes then it's not something you want. But now, post recovery, I'm able to let go and let God handle whatever it is. Some days that's a struggle, depending on the relationship, depending on what it is. But in the end, I know that I'm not responsible for someone else's actions. I'm not responsible for what someone else says. And so that is that's probably the most important relationship skill I have, is to let go and let God do it.
So dialing all that back and not being over
Yes.
responsible and trusting that God can take care of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Trusting God can do it.
What would you say, what are you most excited about today, or your current passion?
Oh, my writing.
Okay.
And helping others, because
Okay, yeah.
it's through that writing that, I'm able to help other people with this issue and a few more issues as well. Whenever I first started in recovery, I searched all over the internet trying to find, some sort of Christian-based help. And there really isn't a lot out there. You have Celebrate Recovery, and that's a great, great program. But, a lot of people need more, than that in addition to. And so that was the reason I started my blog, Transforming Normal, because I wanted to help people, overcome their past, find serenity in their present, and transform their future through the love of Jesus Christ. I mean, that's the way. He is the way, the truth, and the light. So, I'm an avenue that he uses to reach out to people. And then, of course, with the book, 3 Weeks to Forgiveness, I mean, that tells my personal journey to that breaking point, and then after, and what that looks like. So
you've put a lot of these helps, or a lot of these tools on your website I was looking at. So tell me a little bit about some of those tools that are available on your website for someone who may be struggling in this area.
Yeah, well, goodness, I have several articles on, what not to do whenever you live with an alcoholic. Is my loved one an alcoholic? How do I know? Just different things like that. What it looks like to be a codependent. And if you're not sure, there's a quiz on there to, that can kind of help you think outside the box and determine that. There's also an article on there about redefining recovery. For a lot of people, recovery has this stigma on it that it's only for addicts. But recovery is not just for addicts. It's for anyone who places other things in front of God. If you are, I had a shopping addiction. I filled my emptiness with shopping instead of filling it with, the word and, with God. And I used it as an escape from my reality. That's an idol. I place that, before God. So anything like that. And also there's a quiz on there, for that. So there's a lot of different tools and resources that anyone can use, to help them through the recovery journey.
Okay. Well, we're right down here to the final lap, or the speed round. So tell me, what has been your biggest stumbling block in your relationship with God?
Oh, the biggest stumbling block. I'd have to say probably trusting and surrendering. Because sometimes that's a day by day, minute by minute, second by second, thing, depending on what's going on. So just fully trusting that he loves me and that he is going to take care of me.
So, and that means you've got to be still sometimes.
Yes.
And that's what you didn't like, the stillness and the quietness, because you felt like he didn't love you.
Right. Exactly. So, my husband always likes to say that God has worked to help us to get real comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's true. That's true in recovery because, talking in front of people. And then it's also true in the stillness, being still and just being open and listening and fully trusting and surrendering our hurts over to the Lord. So that's probably my biggest stumbling block. And I think it is for a lot of people.
Oh, yes, most definitely.
Yeah.
What is the best advice you have ever received?
Best advice I have ever received. Get in recovery.
Okay.
I mean, really, get in recovery. That was that was the best advice, that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah,
that
to seek help from other people and not just by yourself and not just
exactly.
Yeah,
because Satan wants to use us, use our vulnerabilities and our past against us when we're isolated. He wants us to be isolated. So yeah, that's it. Getting community.
Yeah, he wants to break us off from the crowd, from the group, and then deal with us that way, one at a time, and he can really work us over.
Mm-hmm. Sure can.
Who do you admire the most, other than a biblical figure, and why?
Who do I admire the most? Oh, wow. That's hard. Just one person. Oh, you put me on the spot. I guess I would have to say that, I admire my husband. I admire him for how far he's come in his recovery journey and how he has taken full ownership of it and, working his own recovery on his own. And he supports me. He supports me in all of my endeavors, and our marriage is completely different. So I guess I would have to say him.
Okay, yeah, of how he's really tackled his issues.
Yes.
And not blamed others.
Exactly.
What is your favorite book besides the Bible, and why?
Oh, gosh. There's another tough question. I have so many. Mary DeMuth is one of my favorite authors. And her book, it's a memoir, Thin Places. That's a really good book because she's for anyone who knows who Mary DeMuth's story, and if you don't, please go check it out because she's remarkable. But she was sexually abused whenever she was very, very young, and she talks about that in her memoir. And that's a powerful, sometimes difficult to read, but I think it's a very important book for anyone who has hurts like that in their past, because she really shows God's glory in all that. So,
well, and what would you say is been your most effective relationship habit?
Communication.
Okay.
Open communication.
So not being silent.
Not being silent, but being silent at appropriate times too. I think communication, does involve silence. But I think that communication is really key in any relationship, and authentic and transparent communication.
Okay, so being genuine with each other.
Yeah, being genuine with each other. My husband and I that was one thing, because we didn't communicate well before, and now we communicate on a completely different level, and letting God into that. It's you have to have God first, and then your spouse second, in order to all of that to align appropriately, and have that mutual respect.
Well, we're down here toward the end, so please share with us some parting wisdom and the best way to contact you.
Some parting wisdom. Don't do it alone. Don't try to isolate. If you are struggling with someone in your family, in your life, that is an alcoholic or an addict, or just in a state of dysfunction, get some help somehow. I think that's the most important thing to do. And people can contact me by going to my website, KimberlyDewberry.com. And they can also find me on Facebook. I'm Kimberly Dewberry Transforming Normal is my Facebook page, and I'm all over the social stratosphere. So if you search my name, most likely you'll find me.
So it's KimberlyDewberry.com, and the name of your book again is?
Yes, it's 3 Weeks to Forgiveness. God's Redemption in the Dark Places of Addiction, and it is available now on Amazon.
Okay, so it's on Amazon and it's available on your website as well?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and your website again has many different resources in addition to the book as well.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you for being on Relationship Helpers, Kimberly.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, Vincent. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us today on Relationship Helpers. It is our hope that you gained some valuable information. For the show notes and more information on today's topic, please visit www.relationshiphelpers.net. Again, that is www.relationshiphelpers.net. If you enjoyed our show, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. If you had questions or concerns about our show, please let us know about this as well by going to our website, www.relationshiphelpers.net. Thanks again and have a blessed week. Note that accuracy and authority in regards to the subject matter covered today is not a replacement for professional care. Neither the host, the clinicians, or the guests are rendering clinical or other professional advice. Seek professional help if you need it.